and welcome to Binance Podcast. My name is Helen Hai. I'm the head of Blockchain Charity Foundation. I'm your host today. I'm excited to introduce you Alex and Don Tapscott, co-founders of Blockchain Research Institute and co-authors of the best-selling book, Blockchain Revolution. Alex, Don, thank you very much for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Glad to be here.
Recently, Binance and the Blockchain Research Institute have begun collaboration. And also, Don, you've joined as the chairman of the Lingang Blockchain Academy. We also had the opportunity to join collaboration against the COVID-19. And I'd love to ask both of you some questions related to this. Let me start on how are innovators deploying blockchain to fight the pandemic?
Well, I'll begin. This is Don. Blockchain to us represents the second era of the internet. For decades, we've had an internet of information. Now we have an internet of value, or anything of value, from money, securities, intellectual property, the data in our identities, contracts, deeds, art, music can be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way. This is the internet of value, and it's an extraordinary thing. Now, in a crisis like the current pandemic, which is sweeping the world, we've been doing a lot of work on how blockchain can change how we get the right data to manage this thing, and also how blockchains can be used to fight a pandemic in many different ways. And we've written a very significant report on this, 25,000 words, which is available through the blockchainresearchinstitute.org, and also will be available through Binance as well. And we've come up with a number of different areas where blockchain can make a huge difference in helping us fight back this terrible virus. Alex, over to you.
Yeah, well, one example of that is in how we manage data in the healthcare system. So data is the most important asset really in fighting pandemics. Without it, you can't answer critical questions. You know, who are infected, where have they traveled, etc. And right now, if any useful data exists, it's typically inside of institutional silos, inside of individual hospitals or government departments. And with that data being unable to speak to other pockets of data, and for us to be able to share that data in a trusted way, we're unable to produce the health outcomes that we desire, not just for individuals, but also for populations as a whole. So one of the main recommendations to come out of the report is that we should move towards a version of a self-sovereign identity where individuals have control over their own healthcare information, and where they can share that information into what we call a data commons in a secure and anonymous way, so that government officials and policymakers can use that data to address the pandemic on a population-wide level, to be able to see and track how individuals who may or may not have been affected, may or may not have been vaccinated, may or may not have antibodies, are moving around. And we think that the trade-off between security and privacy need not be so stark, that there is a potential way for us to have your cake and eat it too, as they say, to have robust data that can be used by policymakers at the population level, whilst also maintaining a level of privacy and security for the individual. That's just one of a half a dozen different recommendations that we've made in the report, and obviously happy to talk about the other ones. But really, as Don said, you know, data is one of the most important asset classes of this economy. It's the critical asset class in dealing with these kinds of health emergencies. And the system we have today is antiquated and broken, and there are opportunities to use blockchain to fix it.
Thank you for both of you on that question. I'd love to ask you about supply chain. In the crisis right now, we realize supply chain have been severely constrained by the crisis. What roles does blockchain play in this?
Well, in the supply chain is the foundation of many parts of our economy. If you have it, it came from a supply chain. This is a $50 trillion industry globally. And we're noticing here, of course, in North America, that there are severe weaknesses in our supply chains today. We're unable to get basic equipment to hospitals and to frontline workers who are combating the virus. Something as simple as a paper mask, and something much more significant like a ventilator. And this is really totally unacceptable, given the fact that overall we do have a very good supply chains today. It's just that our systems for managing them are antiquated. They go back decades old technology like EDI or ERP or traditional computer systems. The other problem has been hoarding, and people will go and buy, say, 2 years of toilet paper out of fear and out of lack of transparency in the supply chain. And if they knew that there's a supply chain perfectly capable of creating and delivering toilet paper, then they wouldn't get involved in antisocial hoarding behavior. So blockchain is the new platform for supply chains globally. We can now have supply chains that are much more robust, where there's a single version of the truth in a supply chain, rather than all of these different players and trains and boats and trucks and planes and bills of lading and escrow agents and transfer agents and tax authorities and intermediaries and various payment systems, all functioning using traditional technology and paper and faxes and telephone calls. We can have something very different. We can have a shared network state on a blockchain where there's real-time information. And this is a very powerful thing that could help us dramatically.
Very good. So Alex, I want to ask you about cash during this. Cash has been labeled as the carrier of virus. So do you think cash are important? Do you think there's a digital alternative?
Well, it's a great question. So yes, when the crisis began, we started hearing news that cash, and I mean by cash, I mean, you know, cold hard currency that you can feel in your hand, could potentially be a way for the virus to spread person to person. And it makes sense, you know, if you pay for something and you've got cash in your pocket, you put your hand in your pocket, you may have the virus, you hand it to someone else, you can understand how that would spread. And actually in China, authorities were going so far as to literally launder money, meaning that they were actually taking cash out of circulation and either replacing it or washing the bills so that the virus wouldn't spread, which is you know, quite a smart, but obviously quite a labor-intensive process. So there's been a growing drumbeat to say, well, why don't we just abolish cash altogether? You know, we've got technology to do contactless payments, credit cards, and Apple Pay and WeChat and these other applications are becoming so much more popular. Shouldn't we just abolish cash altogether? And the answer to that is, well, it's kind of complicated. It's true that physical cash is a primitive device. It's a primitive technology, but it also serves a purpose. It allows individuals to transact and make payments and do business peer-to-peer in a frictionless way and in a private way. And there are lots of valid reasons why, you know, individuals may want to make sure that their transactions remain private, you know, and that's something that we ought to preserve. So what's required here is not just some new form of payments that it still involves banks and credit cards and all the old intermediaries. What we need is a digital medium for value that acts as a bearer instrument. And there's obviously lots of very exciting opportunities in that space. The most obvious one are community currencies like Bitcoin. Bitcoin, you know, what's amazing about it really is that it works, and it works so well that it's set off this spark that's kind of caught on like wildfire, and it's now used by tens of millions of people. But not every merchant accepts it. It's still quite volatile. And despite the great efforts at Binance and elsewhere, many people still don't know actually how to acquire Bitcoin. So we should be looking at some other alternatives. We should be encouraging Bitcoin, of course, but looking at other alternatives. One potential alternative are so-called corporate currencies, projects like Libra, which was announced by Facebook last year. Now, while Facebook's Libra is a useful way to move money peer-to-peer, it's actually not really a version of cash, because ultimately the records of transactions and the governance of that network are going to be controlled by the companies that create and oversee it. And that leaves us with the third option, which are so-called central bank digital currencies. Now, there's been a lot of efforts underway around the world to build and develop these central bank digital currencies. In China, I think they've been leaders in this regard. We've also seen projects underway in Canada and Europe and in some smaller countries like Venezuela and Iran. There's an interesting design principle that has to go into these kinds of currencies, which is that we need to be able to ensure that governments can oversee large flows of funds to prevent the funding of crime and terrorism and other illicit activities, while also giving individuals at the retail level the ability to make payments peer-to-peer without necessarily exposing all their information to some central authority. And that's ultimately the biggest challenge. Now, what we've suggested is that perhaps the solution is for governments globally to work together to create what's called a synthetic global hegemonic currency, which is an awful mouthful, and maybe they should consider rebranding. But the idea is fairly simple, which is that individual governments would have their own central bank digital currencies. There would be a global benchmark, which would be priced in a basket of those different currencies, and that benchmark would have its own token, and you'd be able to use that to spend money peer-to-peer. And no single government would be able to have perfect information about how individuals are spending that money. So this is one of those things where crises generally tend to accelerate the pace of history. Things that take years or months or years now take days or weeks to develop and advance. And I think that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and that we have an opportunity to really consider what the future of money is going to look like. And I think it's going to be digital. And if it's going to be digital, then it needs to have these principles of privacy endowed in them.
I'll just add a quick thought to that. First of all, China is a real leader in this area with its DCEP, the central bank digital currency that's coming from the People's Bank of China. And other countries are scrambling to be able to do this. But something like this would be an extraordinary boon to any economy and to the global economy, and help us get the recovery started again quickly. Central bankers would have access to all kinds of information that they didn't have previously. You've changed the inflation rate, you could find out what's happening. You put some money into the economy, you could have an understanding about what people are doing with it. They're investing more, they're saving more, they're spending, and so on. Mm-hmm. There could be a lighter touch on regulation as well. And when you consider just the challenge in the United States, for example, today, of making direct payments to tens of millions of people, how are they going to do that using existing technology? It's going to be a terrible challenge. If we had a central bank cryptocurrency, the US, the digital dollar in the United States, then governments could helicopter drop money right onto the digital wallets of citizens, rather than trying to go through these ancient, arcane payment systems that were developed decades ago. So this is a very exciting topic, and it's dead relevant to the whole question of the global pandemic today.
Fantastic. So when would you see the first central bank digital currency deployed at a big scale globally?
Well, I think that, as Don pointed out, China's been a real leader in this regard. And, President Xi has said that blockchain is something that will be foundational to the next period of growth in the country, and is making it part of that plan. And so I can see the Chinese actually being the first to launch something like this. at the national level. And it's interesting, in North America, people don't really fully appreciate just how large the digital economy already is in China. There are more people on the internet in China than there are in Europe and the United States combined, for example. The flow of payments online is significantly larger than it is in the United States. And in the US, they have this thing called Black Friday, which is a big shopping day. But as you well know, Singles Day blows that out of the water. So China is moving forward with a native digital currency at the national level and injecting it into an economy that is already well suited for something like that. And I think as a result, that's going to be very successful, and you will see its use be widespread very quickly, would be my guess. And then the other thing which is interesting is that China has ambitions to tie together economies in Asia and Africa and elsewhere into a Chinese sphere of influence, and we've seen that with the Belt and Road Project, for example. A native digital currency that's issued by China could be a very robust payment system to be used along those trade networks as well, which has also the intended or unintended consequence of potentially dislodging the US dollar as the main method of payment in a lot of different international trade relationships. So I think that China understands the strategic value of this on the national and international level, which is why they're moving forward with it. And I think, honestly, if you compare it to, say, the US, I mean, there are certain people in the US who have been quite vocal in their support of this, namely the former chairman of the Commodities and Futures Trading Commission, which is one of the largest financial marketplaces on the planet. He's been a big advocate, but in terms of people sitting in power at the government level, the interest has been lacking. And I think that they ignore this at their peril, because this is something that's happening and will, I think, prove to be quite transformational.
So will all financial assets eventually be digital? What is the future of security tokens?
Well, I'll take this one as well, considering that it's a big part of the new book, which I've released recently, called Financial Services Revolution, which is available in English, will soon be available in Chinese as well as in Portuguese. Yes, the answer is that almost every single asset in the economy will be digital at some point, or a financial asset, I should say. You can't digitize a house, but you can digitize the title to that house. If you consider the stock market, I think that's the best place to start. So the value of all crypto assets today is around 210 or $215 billion US, depending on the day that you're looking at it, which is a significant number, about half the market capitalization of JP Morgan, the largest bank in the world. But if you compare it to the value of the entire securities market, specifically the equity market, it's a rounding error. The global equity market, even with the latest correction from the virus, is still worth 50 to 60 plus trillion dollars. And it turns out that shares are a perfect kind of asset to be digitized using the same technology that makes cryptocurrencies possible, which is blockchain. Because a stock is really just a contract. It is a contract that entitles the bearer, the owner of that contract, to a share of a common enterprise and to certain rights, such as the payment of dividends, or say the ability to vote on certain matters like changes of control and so forth. All of those different rules in that contract can be completely digitized and using blockchain. And the reasons to do that are sort of many-fold. Number one, if you have a perfect record of who owns what asset, then all of the record keeping that is actually proven to be quite unreliable basically goes away, because you have a real-time, auditable, truthful record of who owns what shares. Trading of those securities can happen instantly and peer-to-peer, rather than requiring broker-dealers and clearinghouses and custodians and transfer agents and all these other arcane institutions, which undergird the infrastructure of financial markets, you can do it all peer-to-peer in a decentralized way. And the trading period doesn't take 2 to 3 to 4 days, which is what it still takes today. It can happen in a matter of seconds. So you get speed, efficiency, reliability, trust, and decentralization embedded into our financial markets, which I think most people would agree are some admirable qualities that we should all be working towards. And security and stocks and equities are one of a dozen different kinds of financial assets which are well suited to this. The market for fixed income, so bonds, and specifically government bonds, is many, many times larger than the market for stocks. And that is also a huge opportunity for this technology. And we're starting to see this, of course. There are a number of different companies, Harbor-backed, Binance, et cetera, that are looking very hard at this space. And I think you'll see that it will become one of the hottest growth areas in the coming years.
You talk about China. What are the other leading countries and regions in the world for blockchain innovation?
Well, we've been studying this over the last few years, and this is a very critical question, because if it's true that this is the second era of the internet, the first era was based in Silicon Valley in California. Where will the second era be based? Now, it won't be one location only. There will be a number. But if any country or any region can build up an ecosystem that's world class for this new technology, that creates enormous prosperity, jobs, government tax revenue, and all kinds of other benefits, innovation, and so on. So to build a global ecosystem, it's great to have a large domestic market. You need to have ways of funding entrepreneurship. You need world-class universities and talent, not just computer science talent, but talent in general for innovation. You need governments that are supportive, governments as model users of the technology, but also governments that create policies that encourage entrepreneurship. And as you look around the world, it's very difficult to have all of those different criteria together. Silicon Valley is not at the top of the list, but there are a number of global centers. They include in Switzerland around Zug, where there are many, many thousands of people working in the blockchain and crypto space. Elsewhere in Europe, London is pretty good because it's a global financial center. In North America, New York is very strong with a big ecosystem, as is Toronto in Canada, that has the Toronto Waterloo blockchain corridor. In Asia, there are a number of strong centers, most of them in China, with Shenzhen, Shanghai, Beijing, Hangzhou, and Guangzhou all being very important centers. And now Hainan is making a lot of investments in this space as well. Other areas include Singapore. There's a growing ecosystem now in Tokyo and in Seoul as well. So those are just some on our list. We track these actually at blockchainresearchinstitute.org. But the stakes are very, very high in countries creating the conditions whereby this can occur. You know, the last time I was speaking in China, it was introduced by the president or the vice chair of the Central Party, Communist Party in China. And he read a greeting from President Xi Jinping, which in the greeting, Xi stated how important that he felt the blockchain was for China and building an innovation economy. And that kind of national leadership is very rare in the world. You sure don't see that in a country like the United States, for example, or for that matter, in almost any other European country. And I can't tell you how important that is in creating the conditions whereby entrepreneurs feel that they have support and a license really to invent in this space.
Don, Binance are very honored because you recently joined force with us, and you also become the chairman of the Lingang Blockchain Academy. As we can see, the crisis revealed limitations on top-down governance. What kind of advice, under this Lingang Blockchain Academy, you would give to government, also entrepreneurs then?
Well, for governments, you need to do everything I just said to create the conditions whereby innovation can occur. One of the biggest problems is regulation. This is a problem pretty much everywhere in the world. As we have securities regulation, which makes it very difficult for entrepreneurs to use token generation events to fund innovation. And this is an extraordinary new opportunity where companies at a very early stage can either not rely so much on or even bypass traditional forms of angel venture capital and other sources of funds and go directly peer-to-peer to interested parties who might want to fund this. And I won't mention any names, but one country that we examined just very recently in the Western world has a very important country has a huge problem where the securities regulators are almost hostile towards these important new token generation activities, where banks won't give an actual bank account to a company that has the name blockchain or crypto or Bitcoin or something in their title, because they assume that there are bad actors involved, which is ridiculous. This is the second era of the internet. This is something that's enormously positive and good. Of course, there are bad actors because criminals are always the first to adopt any new technologies, but this is no different than anything else, really. So, and there's a lot of a lot of unclarity too in these security markets, where the regulator might view a token offering only as a security, and the tax people view it as a product that's generating revenue, and they want to tax it. And then you've got some other regulators that view it differently. So it's very important that governments and regulators around the world wake up and understand what a historic new opportunity this is for innovation in their countries.
Technology should work for people. As you said, this is the second era of the internet. After all, it should all come down to people and value. We're seeing crisis in hospitals. There's a shortage of supplies. How do you see blockchain can help this?
Well, I'll take that one. So I think it's quite clear from the crisis that frontline medical professionals, doctors, nurses, paramedics, and so forth, really are the heroes of this moment that we're going through. And they're our last line of defense in so many ways. Yet hospitals can't seem to onboard people fast enough. And this is a strange thing because it's actually not for a lack of talent per se. It's the inability to find them. There's a concept called the talent management paradox, basically, where organizations are continuously struggling to tap into pools of skilled people looking for work. So how exactly does blockchain solve this? Well, I think in answering one of your initial questions, Helen, I talked about this idea of a sovereign identity, the digital identity. And it's relevant, of course, to health records and to health data, but it's also relevant to credentials. So what if individuals had, as part of their self-sovereign identity, credentials about where they worked, where they went to school, what their qualifications were, and so forth. And employers could access that database and know with confidence that the information contained in those identities was real and accurate. It would radically improve the search function for businesses, hospitals, governments, and so forth in finding, identifying, and onboarding talented people to start working right away. And this is actually one of the recommendations that we made in the most recent report, and dig into in some level of detail, because there are a number of initiatives underway, ODEM, ProCredX, and others, that we talk about that are trying to solve just exactly that.
And in this crisis, we witness and the virus, actually, we all the same, whether you are head of states or you are somebody very famous, you can still catch the same virus. So what do you think the blockchain can assist in philanthropic space?
Well, I'll start, and then I think Don will have some thoughts on this one as well. So there are a couple of things that can be done. Binance Charity, as an example, is using its influence to bring together companies in the space to match their pledged donations in order to allocate money towards PPE, medical equipment, and so forth. And something like that, which is urgently needed, is an admirable thing. And I know that also Binance is looking at how it can marshal blockchain itself to solve this. And I think that's where the future lies. So our belief is that blockchain can fundamentally transform how NGOs, governments, and individual donors deliver aid to philanthropic causes and organizations. There's a strange paradox today as it relates to foreign aid, which is that money that is intended to reach a specific vulnerable population oftentimes does not, because it's intercepted by organizations, middlemen, or even, unfortunately, corrupt government officials who actually end up taking that or using those resources when it should be going to the final subject. And we think that blockchain can improve the delivery of philanthropic aid in a couple of really important ways. So first off, by disintermediating the middlemen who act as the conduits of large aid transfers, blockchain can reduce this problem, this chronic problem of outright misappropriation and theft. And second, and I think this is actually more important, as an immutable ledger for the flow of funds, blockchain compels large institutions, from aid groups to governments and everyone else in between, to act with integrity and abide by their commitments. If they don't, people will be able to see that malfeasance and hold them to account. So imagine you're donating to a cause that's delivering protective equipment or is funding the development of medical devices. You'll be able to see where that money goes, how it's spent, where it's allocated, et cetera. And we can actually take this one step further, where we can program the money with a certain level of intelligence. So if you're donating to a cause that is building ventilators or is creating and manufacturing masks, you'll be able to see that the money goes into a separate account, which is locked in a smart contract and is only released if it actually reaches the intended target. And if people have greater knowledge and have greater transparency into how funds are being spent, they're more willing to donate more. So this will actually, we think, create a potential boom in additional aid, because everyone will know and trust that the money is going to the intended target. So we can leverage this technology really to just transform how aid is delivered. And this is one of those great crises where people are signing up to donate because everyone is just so keen to do it, given the severity of the crisis. That we could use this as an opportunity to fix those big problems.
The whole issue of blockchain and its role in philanthropy is a subset of this broader theme that we're working on here at the Blockchain Research Institute, which is blockchain for good. And philanthropy, pandemics. In our report, we talk about many of the things we've been discussing today: just-in-time supply chain solutions, creating enormously much more powerful data through sovereign health records, blockchain-based rapid response registry for medical professionals, blockchain-based incentive models to reward responsible behavior. And but beyond these opportunities in a pandemic, there are much broader opportunities to help with public health, building a better pharmaceutical industry and a better response capability. And then beyond that, there are all these wonderful opportunities. You think about financial inclusion. There are well over 1 billion people in the world who don't have access to a bank account, who are not part of the global banking system, but many of them have a supercomputer in their pocket. We can deliver financial services to these people almost overnight through this technology. Land titles. In the developing world, 70% of land titles are not enforceable. And this is a big problem because if you don't have a valid title to your land, you can't borrow against it, you can't plan for the future. Blockchain is the new platform for immutable land titles where no corrupt leader in Honduras or some bribed civil servant in a town in India can mess with your land title. A really big one is remittances. You know, I live in Toronto. There are 1 million Chinese people, and many of them send money home. They're part of the global diaspora. And why should they be charged 10 to 15% by the Western Union? This is almost it's unthinkable. It's unconscionable. And with blockchain, that money can move at the speed of light, not taking 4 to 7 days. And these people can send all of the money to their relatives. And you know, the list goes on and on and on. There are many different topics under this category of blockchain for good. A good source for some of that is actually my TED Talk on TED.com. Many millions of people have watched that, where I talk about how blockchain can help us achieve a fairer and more prosperous world.
Alex and Don, really appreciate what you just said. And actually, I'm a big fan of your blockchain for good. At Binance Charity Foundation, we truly believe actually technology should work for people and values. And we want to shape a future that works for all of us by putting people first and empowering them. We believe blockchain should be play as a complement to the best part of the human nature, which is creativity, empathy, stewardship. And this is how the blockchain revolution should lift humanity into a new collective and more moral conscious space, a shared sense of destiny for all of us. So my last question, what do you see the implementation challenge that could prevent blockchain from reaching this potential?
Well, I'll kick things off, and then I know Don will have something to add. We believe blockchain is the second era of the internet and has the potential to transform money, finance, business, government, our institutions, and ultimately our entire economy for the better if we will it. But we also recognize that there are potential reasons why blockchain may not reach its potential. And there are so many of these reasons actually that we dedicated an entire chapter in the book Blockchain Revolution to addressing each of these individually. The chapter is called Showstoppers, Why Blockchain Might Fail. Now, that book came out a couple of years ago. I think at this point, it's fair to say that blockchain is not going to fail, but it may fail to reach its potential or its highest potential if these potential showstoppers do come to fruition. So what are some examples of that? Well, we've already addressed a couple of them on the call. One being, how will governments react? Will they embrace this technology? Will they create the conditions for entrepreneurs to succeed, or will they react to it negatively, employing all this sort of old ways of thinking and dogma that directed them in the past? How will incumbents respond? Big companies today that have a vested interest in maintaining the status of markets and business may fight against change. Is the technology have the ability to scale? Will it be ready to meet the demands that we want to place on it to transform business, to reinvent philanthropy and so forth? Will blockchain potentially create dislocation to the labor market? Will it potentially disintermediate people from all sorts of vital business processes? And these are all valid concerns, but you have to ask yourself, and I think your framing of the question was quite correct. Are these reasons that blockchain is a bad idea, or are they implementation challenges to be overcome? And should we work to overcome them? And I think the answer to each and all of those is yes. On the question of governments, for example, we have seen many governments in China and Switzerland and Singapore, in Korea most recently, changing their tune or re-emphasizing their commitment to this technology, and I think that's a big positive. We've seen incumbent organizations. You know, the Blockchain Research Institute is funded in large part by large companies that are already leaders in their industries, companies like Tencent or Fujitsu or Microsoft or IBM, Exxon, FedEx, and so forth. And we're incredibly encouraged by the work that these large companies are doing to not only look at how this technology could change how they do business today, but to potentially see how it could transform their industry and what kinds of new products and services they could create as a result. So we're very encouraged by that. The technology itself continues to radically and rapidly improve. And I think the success of Binance as a corporation and as a business in this industry is a prime example of that. And then on the question of labor, it's possible that people lose their jobs. It's also possible, though, that blockchain creates the conditions for creative destruction, the destruction of old industries and the launch of new ones. And actually, we think the technology could bring about the golden days of entrepreneurship, the ability for people to organize capital and assets quickly, digitally, to fund their projects, tapping into global markets of investors, and to grow businesses regardless of where they are in the world. So those are just a few examples of challenges and then the ways in which we can overcome them. It's not an exhaustive list. There are others, of course, as well. But again, I think the key thing here is that we should be looking to overcome them because there's an opportunity to build a more fair, more resilient, more anti-fragile, and more open economy in a more open world. And that's something we should all be working towards.
Yes, I'll just add to that that this is really a new paradigm, a new internet. It's part of the second era of the digital age. And when you get a new paradigm, they're often received badly with coolness, or worse, hostility. Vested interests fight against change, as Alex just said. And often leaders of old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new. So how are we going to find the leadership for this new era to occur? And our research indicates that leadership can come from anywhere. It can come from a head of state or government leader, but that's very rare. Sometimes it can come from a CEO, but that's rare as well. Typically, leadership comes from all kinds of different places within an organization, a government, or a society. And that's a very positive message for us, because to overcome these challenges, leadership can really come from anywhere. And it means that each of us has an opportunity to be a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a change agent within a company, or a government, as a writer or thinker, whatever. And don't get us wrong. We don't think that this technology is going to solve problems. People solve problems, not technology. But the first era of the internet, while it's created many wonderful things, it also created many problems. You know, it undermined the living of content creators like musicians. It led to a fragmentation of public discourse. It led to our data being captured by huge companies. There are many other problems. So technology in the second era is not going to fix that. But as we said, Alex and I said in Blockchain Revolution in the opening sentence, that once again, the technology genie has escaped from the bottle. Second time now. And it was summoned by this anonymous person or persons with uncertain motives at this very difficult time in human history. And the genie is not going to solve our problems, but it gives us another opportunity, another kick at the can, we might say, to bring about some very profound and powerful changes to our institutions, our economy, and our society, but only if we will it. So at the Blockchain Research Institute, we're encouraging leadership, and we're looking for leaders everywhere in the world. And we're very proud to have Binance as being a member of the BRI. And I'm very proud to be the honorary dean of the Lingang Academy as well. We look forward to helping build this movement, because that's really what it is around the world, so that maybe this smaller, more distributed world that our grandchildren inherit might actually be a better one.
Thank you very much, Don and Alex, for all of those inspirational and wise words. It's very clear neither technology nor the disruption that comes with its force over which humans have no control. All of us have the responsibility to guide this revolution and play a role on it. Like the old saying, this is the best of times, and it also the worst of times. There has never been a time of great promise. Let me quote something Nelson Mandela once said. It always seems impossible until it's done. So at Binance, we look forward working very closely with two of you to moving from that vision to action, dreams to reality. Thank you all.
Thank you, Helen. Well said.